Now, there are many, many explanations that are all legitimate of why dungeons are as they are in D&D-esque worlds. However, I have noticed over the last couple of decades something that really centrally caught my attention about logical origins of dungeons in D&D-esque worlds or anything similar, where it really points to itself why there are so many dungeons and how they are exactly like we see them. There seems to be an easy universal explanation, even if you want to find others, but that one explanation that I'm mentioning now seems to hold as a central cause to development of dungeons as we know them. So without further ado, when, as we've probably watched others discuss, when a castle gets into such a high fantasy setting, castle needs to evolve with protections because it's open from above so much. And we have here in this world people who are able to effortlessly climb steep walls, who are capable of being very stealthy, very invisible potentially, etc., etc. And there's so many flying monsters, burrowing monsters, monsters that jump. Everything is capable of scaling a castle easily, pretty much. It barely offers any protection at base, if it's not enchanted in some way. At least in high fantasy. In low fantasy, still sturdy high walls and a moat are a really good thing. Say against orcs or anything, that would invade in a similar way like originally humans would. But when we get to sufficiently high fantasy, there's so many different dangers and predators for, well, anyone, humans or otherwise, settling in that castle, that its open nature becomes, well, its uselessness. But even given that was already discussed for a long time, rather than just saying what can we do to enchant the castle and secure it better, we should look at what happens when similar happens to castles anywhere, especially here on Earth. They came out of fashion because similar things happened. They were too open from the air. They were too open to weapons of mass destruction. They were too open to those kinds of forms of attack that we have in fantasy settings too. So what happens to castles when you don't want to be having such a rich faction that they can just enchant the castle to bits so that it's efficient? What happens then? Well, everybody makes a bunker. Everybody makes a castle underground. That's what happens here. You either have a no-effort military base that relies on its sensors and guards, therefore essentially skill and detection purely, and that detection is essentially close to what we have magically in D&D and always had, or you have very secure underground bases and facilities in order to have them even a little bit secret. So that's what happens in other worlds too. More efficient castles that are not there to look pretty and symbolize the centralized power over the kingdom, the actually important ones, but not known to the common people, they migrate underground. Or they get to be in other pocket planes or something like that. And when Wizard is feeling fancy enough that they want to enchant the castle to bits, as I said previously, they can even make a floating one and so on in heavens somewhere where it's at least out of the way of seeing it all the time. Because one thing with magic is that the more you know about the opponent, so the more you see in the castle courtyard, into its walls, etc., the better you're able to defeat it. The less you see, the less you detect, the less you're able to do anything, because magic is operated by your mind and perception. So therefore, moving the castle out of the way completely so that it's camouflaged, invisible, protected, all privacied up properly, outside the view of anyone, is essentially the most efficient thing to do. And therefore, dungeons are easily numerous and frequently even highly populated, because it's not like all of them are abandoned. But there's lots of them that are, due to them being raided once already in the past, and it's frequently easier to find another place, at least currently, because the enemy now knows where you were previously and crushed you there, so you don't want to return unless you have a good reason. But even if you had a good reason, enemy can spread the information about what happened there, and then your private little cellar is no private anymore. Therefore, when people know about an underground dungeon, it quickly loses its power. It gets raided. And that's what we observe by sheer evolution of adventuring. Because don't forget, as story-driven and as fantasy-based as it is, we've all been DMing and being players at this RPG business for decades and decades and decades, and some conclusions and some evolutions have been made and discovered, even if subconsciously. So, that's actually one of the better lines of why dungeons are as they are in a fantasy setting. There is more to it than that, but about that another time, because it's a different sort of deal as well. One day I'll talk about that theory I call wall contract, but that's for then, and this is for now. So, adventure, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next or even every week, because every week I have more such things for you. I make them myself. I'm M, and welcome to dMTable. See you next time.